Welcome, everybody. Happy Wednesday, happy lunchtime, and um, happy spring. I'm so excited to welcome you all to our Cities, Towns, and Counties webinar. We have some fantastic speakers going to talk to us about bridges today, bridging the gap and boardwalks. And I am going to just make sure to welcome those that are hopefully new joining in today. These webinars are free for all to join and learn from, specifically tailored for cities, towns, and counties, but anyone is welcome to join. And we are hosting this from the Great Trails State Coalition. We have a vision of all 100 North Carolina counties enjoying health and safety and economic development, tourism, transportation, and all of the environmental benefits and the personal benefits that we know that trails can provide for thriving communities. So, what success looks like for our coalition is adequate recurring funding for the Great Trails State program. So that is the funding that our General Assembly has passed, and the funding that we are advocating for on a regular basis for all kinds of trails to receive that funding and put greenways and trails in their communities. So we also advocate for state policies and programs to support trail development um, and manage those trails. We are as ever, working to create this very strong and popular brand that is an open source brand. And we have logos for you to use and lift this brand as your own to be the Great Trails State. So that wherever you are, you're never very far from a very great trail experience. And so, as I mentioned, this brand is for everyone. It's for nonprofits, it's for towns and communities everywhere across North Carolina, agency partners, our industry partners. It's for all types of surfaces, so not just natural surfaces, but we're talking about paved greenways and blueways and waterways and the different kinds of users, all kinds of users for all mobilities. Um, and of course, we want to see this in all 100 counties and becoming the great, and we already are. We're the Great Trail State. It's awesome. And we couldn't do this without membership support, which helps us in this advocacy, which helps us in this movement, which has helped us push over the line $60 million that have come back to communities so far in this young coalition. And the new members or town isn't on this list, we welcome the opportunity to have a conversation about how we can help you make that happen and have them be members in this work. Just a quick overview of the legislative successes for that the coalition has implemented. We started with this year of the trail designation, which really got the message out and the story clear about the need and the opportunities related to trails. It also added the 29 million for the Complete the Trails Fund for state designated and authorized trails. We had, after that, the DOT feasibility study, which allowed to see the connection opportunities and needs again a bit further and across all 100 counties and giving us that plan. In 2023, we had our second big win for the 25 million that was passed for the Great Trail State program. As a competitive grant process, but we saw those grants awarded last summer and many different projects across the states that are getting under contract now. In 20 and last year, or I guess that was 2 years ago now, 2024, we were able to pass this Great Trail State Day designation as part of the Farm Act, and so that's every third Saturday of October is Great Trail State Day, and we have all kinds of toolkits and and logos and ideas for how to implement that on our website. We couldn't do this also without our state agency partners. Thank you all so much for the hard work that you do to make this happen. This webinar series, as I mentioned, is for our tailored for our cities, towns, and counties kind of program. But it is a resource for all coalition members and anyone who wants to join. So we're very grateful for Permatrack, who has been a member and an early sponsor to make the Great Trails State a reality. And so we're here today because of Permatrack and are really, really grateful for your time and the effort that you've put into the coalition and its creation over the last few years and in giving us dropping some knowledge on us today about the bridges. We also in April have the Vonda coming to tell us about the state outdoor recreation plan, and that's new publication that's out. And we also have this really awesome new dashboard on our website that I encourage everyone to check out. It's a dashboard around the greenway activity, and so you can see the tracking mechanisms and where they are and how many people per day are going on those trails. It's amazing. Um, and here's a sample. This is a screenshot. So that we've got folks joining us in May to tell us about how to really use this data for your grant writing and other programs in your communities. So just a reminder to please tag us and leverage the opportunity to share your stories and trail stories and about what's happening in your community. Get your merch. We have a new merch site set up, and we have great things that you can share the brand and the story of the Great Trail State. And lastly, not to be missed is the conference of the year happening in Winston-Salem in August. If you are not signed up, we hope you get signed up soon. The early bird registration is out. Um, we have a nomination for your trail heroes out there right now. We're also looking for trail films. We have a great trail film fest as part of that. Thank you so much to the sponsors who make it a reality to have this fantastic conference of sharing and knowledge and leadership that comes together as part of that. So that's it for me. I'm going to pass it to Jason and John. Thank you so much for joining us today and leading us through this conversation about bridges.
Of course. Thanks again for the opportunity to speak with the group. Appreciate it, Julie. My name is John Pyle. I'm the VP of Sales and Marketing for Permatrack, based in Greenville, South Carolina. So I'm one state over. And also with me today is Jason Philbin, who is the president and CEO of Permatrack. He's based in our Charlotte, North Carolina headquarters. And so we're going to talk a little bit about boardwalks today. So we have a lot of material to cover. We're going to do our best here to go through it quickly and allow plenty of time for questions. If you see something that catches your eye, raise your hand, put a note in the chat, and we'll do our best to address them as we go. If not, we'll have time at the end. But what we wanted to do was this is kind of a high level presentation meant to cover sort of the aspects of a boardwalk design process that we've vetted this through ASLA, through their LACES program. So we're going to go over boardwalk design and planning, typical foundation selections. We'll look at the three different main materials that are often used for boardwalks, and then Jason's going to take us through some case studies, some examples of projects in the state of North Carolina that we were familiar with. So I will get started with looking at boardwalk design and planning. So basically, when you have a trail, you're doing your alignment early on in the pre-planning preliminary stages. Your alignment's going well on grade, and then you hit a wetland area or some body of water or something like that requires you to think, okay, how will I get through this particular barrier, but maintain and meet all the necessary requirements. So you typically will run into a couple of different regulatory agencies, either the EPA or the Corps of Engineers may control what you can and can't do in that wetland. And that the authority for that was granted through the Clean Water Act back in 1972, and there's a Section 404, which is that permitting process, which helps to define that delineated wetland or stream boundaries. That this one slide could be its own 1 hour lunch and learn on how to navigate the environmental and the regulatory hurdles, and there are people who are much more familiar with that than myself. But it's really important to have a good wetland consultant on board us at times for these kind of projects. So once you figured out that you do have this wetland body of water that you have to go through, part of your trail definition is you have to think a little bit about the usage, which will help inform how wide that trail needs to be. If it's just for single use hikers, it may be a more narrow, but what we often see is if it's a multi-use with hikers and bikers, it might be 10 to 12 feet wide. And then you also oftentimes need to consider some buffers on the shoulders for vegetation or signage, as well as overhead obstructions. So these all will work into your overall trail design, as well as considerations for your boardwalk or bridge. And some other considerations that often come into play on a site will oftentimes see existing utilities, either buried or overhead, have to be relocated or avoided. There may be cultural or historic sites that need to be managed or avoided. You may have endangered species, either plants or animals. I've seen examples of both of those through the years. Or you may be restricted to certain times a year when you can work based on nesting or mating seasons for wildlife along the corridor of your boardwalk. So there's a lot of considerations, a lot of things that go into planning rather than just the structure itself. Um, but pivoting to the structure, so what we typically see for boardwalks is three general types. So it'll either be a timber, wooden, traditional, composite, or precast concrete. So you've probably all seen timber boardwalks. Here's a good example of kind of what that looks like. You'll have stringers that are running longitudinally, often on like a 16-inch spacing that are spanning from pier to pier, usually about a 10-foot span between piers, and then you'll have a wooden board decking. Composite structures are very similar to wood in that you'll have multiple stringers or multiple longitudinal members that are giving the structural support, and then you'll have a decking that would make up the walking surface, and all of that will be supported by some type of a foundation with a header. As you see here, you need the headers to provide the support for the multiple stringers. And again, usually you'll see spans in the 10 to 12 foot range for both wood and composite. And then the other option we see are precast concrete boardwalk systems. These consist of a two beam line structural support rather than multiple stringers on a 16-inch center. So you see that cross section there on the right hand of the page. So the two beam lines will span from pier to pier. With a precast system, typically you're seeing spans that will be longer, 20 to 24 feet is more typical for a precast concrete boardwalk. And then you'll have treads or deck members that make up the walking surface running along in the direction of travel. And that'll all be supported by some kind of a foundation system. And I'll touch on foundations here a little bit further. But those are the three main types of systems that you might see from a material standpoint. Another thing you need to think about is your clear width. So that'll be driven by your trail clear width will be driven by the intended usage. So oftentimes, as I said, for a multi-use trail, it's a 12 foot, 10 to 12 foot wide. But clear width is that distance between the handrails or the curb. So as the sign on the right shows, you want to avoid a narrow bridge. So when you're sizing a structure, either a bridge or a boardwalk, you want to make sure that it has sufficient structure width so that clear width between the handrails matches up with your trail approaching so that you don't create an obstruction. For the codes, most often there are really a couple of different codes that come into play when you're looking at pedestrian bridges and a boardwalk is simply a type of pedestrian bridge, if you want to think of it that way. So the main kind of overarching type of specification is the LRFD bridge design for bridges. So that's kind of the big highway design that AASHTO publishes. Within that document, there is a specification that's specific to pedestrian bridges, and that's what we always recommend following for a boardwalk. Again, it's just a type of pedestrian bridge if you want to think of it that way. There's also references to IBC, the International Building Code. So sometimes IBC codes will come into play as well. And your consultant, your designer on the project can help you guide through which one's the most appropriate for your project. Within those specifications of those guide codes, you'll see references to design loads to design for. For AASHTO, it'll be a combination of a 90 PSF, which is your pedestrian live load, and a vehicle wheel load based on the clear width of that boardwalk. So if your structure is 7 feet to 10 feet clear, that would be an H5 or a 10,000 pound vehicle. If you're more than 10 feet clear width, so if you're one of these multi-use trails and you're 12 feet wide, AASHTO would recommend using a 20,000 pound or an H10 vehicle. What this does is it helps to allow maintenance vehicles to traverse the structure. It also helps prevent an accidental case where if it's wide enough for a vehicle to get on it, you should probably assume that a vehicle will get on it. A member of the public might decide it'd be fun to drive their truck down the boardwalk. So you want to make sure it's designed and can handle that kind of a load. IBC is a little bit different. IBC typically is just referring to the pedestrian live load, either 60 to 100 PSF, depending on the usage. That picture on the bottom right there is a good representation of what a 100 PSF load looks like. Think of an elevator, people standing shoulder to shoulder on an elevator. That's kind of what 100 PSF would feel like. And we see that when it's more of a gathering space where you might have events where people would be on that boardwalk, just kind of uh, congregating. Other types of loads that may come into play that would impact or influence the design would be wind. We have a kind of a uniform wind load that gets applied to all structures, and as you get closer to the coast, those wind loads will increase. So just knowing where you are in the world helps to inform the structural engineer on what the appropriate wind load would be. Certain areas we get into seismic loading. Certainly West Coast, we're all familiar with the earthquake threat or conditions that are present on the West Coast, but you'll notice there's some pretty significant seismic activity on the East Coast as well, particularly down in the Charleston area. It's a very active fault line. Western North Carolina has some seismic considerations. Again, just something that needs to be taken into consideration. Other types of loads would be hydraulic loads. We see that quite a bit when you're spanning a river or a stream. You need to think about that. And if you are anticipating maintenance vehicles or emergency vehicles accessing the structure, braking loads or braking forces would come into play. In some locations, we see this quite a bit in mountainous areas or out west or up north. You'll see a snow load, which is basically another dead load you have to account for. And then there's also temperature and shrinkage considerations. Structures can grow or shrink based on temperature. So the longer the structure, the bigger that impact could be. So it just gets taken into consideration. To sum up the load combinations, just keep in mind that once you have the dead loads, which is just the weight of the structure, and the live loads, the vehicles or the people, then a factor gets applied to each one of those. Again, have a factor of safety so that there you do have that reassurance that the structure is going to perform. Another aspect that we always recommend is making sure that your project has a good set of specifications. It's going to help to set a clear quality standard for not only the structure supplier, like Permatrack or any other entity providing the structure, but it also sets the standard for the contractor. So it helps them understand what it is that you want as an owner. So to make sure that when the project's built, you're going to get a structure delivered that is what you were anticipating And so everybody will be on the same page from a bidder standpoint, from a manufacturer standpoint, with clear specifications, and also protect against an inferior alternate being proposed that you maybe did not want to see on your structure or on your project. I mentioned foundations earlier. One of the most critical parts of any structure is what's holding it up. This is a very big cost driver, not only for the materials of the foundation, but also for the installation for the contractor. And really, the only way to understand what your foundation needs to be is to get a geotechnical report done. And we always encourage getting that done early in the process. Having a geotechnical engineer go out, do some borings at the location of your bridge or boardwalk, and that they will then make a recommendation on what the best foundation type will be for your particular project. And here's a good look at some examples of the different types of foundations that we most often see. Everything from simple spread foundations, kind of at grade or just below grade, to driven deep foundations. As you can imagine, there's a wide range of cost associated with these different foundations. Deep foundations, pile types, these are going to be your more expensive foundations, but oftentimes, especially when you're in wetland areas, you have very poor soils, and it's just what you have to do to be able to support the structure. So we see timber piles used quite often, fiberglass, the FRP, the fiber reinforced polymer composite piles are a good option. Drilled shaft concrete or concrete caissons are a nice option when you need that lateral stability, when you have hydraulic forces or seismic forces that have a high lateral component. Driven steel, either H piles or pipe piles we see quite often. Helical piers is a system that we see being utilized kind of more and more. Really, it's the deep foundation, but it doesn't require the heavy driving equipment that you see with a driven pile. And then lastly, you can drive precast concrete piles, pre-stressed concrete piles. We don't see those as often. More often, you might see those on coastal environment where you have deep requirements to drive and you have high lateral forces. Shallow foundations are probably going to be your most cost effective, but their use is a little bit limited and it's going to be strictly driven by your geotechnical conditions. So you can have a precast foundation or a cast in place concrete foundation. So either of those would be sufficient or could be a good option for you. And then the other question that will come up is handrail or a curb, or do you need anything? So what we typically see is this is going to go back to the ADA requirements that most designers are following. So if you're less than 30 inches from the walking surface to the existing ground, you don't need a handrail. You don't really need anything. It's kind of a safety consideration. Oftentimes we'll see a curb utilized just to keep people from accidentally stepping off or pushing a stroller off the side of the boardwalk. So it's a good way to keep people on the structure. When you exceed 30 inches, then you're into a railing for fall protection. And much like I mentioned ASHTO and IBC design loads and codes earlier, there are design codes for railing as well. So ASHTO applies two loads simultaneously. So a 50-pound per linear foot kind of a line load plus a point load of 200 pounds. And IBC looks at those independently. So it's a little different way of applying the loads. The ASHTO load will result in a little more robust railing. The IBC works fine, but the ASHTO loading is a little more robust, and we see that more often with linear transportation projects. Handrail options, you can literally use any type of a handrail on a boardwalk that you would like to use from an aesthetic standpoint. So metal, wood, aluminum, galvanized steel. As with anything, though, the material does have a cost implication. So the most cost-effective approach would be a timber handrail. You'll have to do some maintenance to it and possibly replace it over time, but it is going to be more cost-effective than, say, the one at the bottom there, a fully stainless steel type of a system with a frame and stainless steel cable. So something to consider the aesthetic and then also the cost and then the future maintenance of that handrail. Next up will be some constructability considerations of how you build it, and then some examples of some applications. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason to take us through the next series of slides.
Yeah, thank you, John. Thank you, Julie, for this opportunity also. I see that we have about 20 people on online, and I wanted to let you know that what John said initially is that this presentation is part of a LACES approved presentation. If you're a design professional, landscape architect specifically, and you want to get a certificate from us for this presentation, we can issue those, but you have to take a test. You have to answer and get 8 out of 10 questions correctly. So um, if you're one of those people, simply put it in the chat. I want a certificate, and we will send you the quiz, and we will administer that, and then we will send that to LACES, and we will get you recorded with LACES if you pass the quiz, and we'll get you the certificate. Okay, so that's
That is such good news. We did have a question about that and we didn't realize that. So thank you
yeah.
for making that offering and letting us know.
Yeah,
Awesome.
of course. Now you have to get 8 out of 10 right. So continue to pay attention. You have to pay attention.
And
Um,
we made the questions really hard.
yes, they're very, very hard, but they are discoverable in these slides. And I would bet you there's still some questions that haven't been answered yet. And we will, of course, we'll answer any questions too. So we're going through this very quickly for you. Um, John has explained a lot of different particulars of what you have to consider when you're designing or deciding about your board. Constructability cannot be ignored. It is extremely important. And John, let's go to the next slide. And what I mean by constructability is how are you going to build the boardwalk, or how is your contractor going to build the boardwalk? And we look at three different types of methodologies in building a boardwalk. There's a traditional boardwalk, hybrid, and a full top-down construction. Quickly, what does that mean? Traditional sense, your most cost-effective way to go it, probably your quickest way to do it would be to install the foundations and the boardwalk components, whether it's a timber, plastic, composite, or a precast Permatrack system. Everything is built from the ground, from the adjacent. You can see that you can move around on the equipment anywhere you want to. You can disturb the land as much as you want to, right? So you have the freedom to do whatever you want. Contractors love that. Now, if you do a hybrid top-down construction process, think about your wetlands where you want to put a boardwalk. You might say, well, Jason and John, we're limited to a corridor, and I'm limited to the disturbance that I can do to the ground. And this has to do with going back to your permitting requirements. But ask the question, can we, the design and the construction team, build the foundations from the ground and then get out of the ground and then set all of the components or all the pieces from the top? And you can see here in the picture, the foundations were concrete piers. They were all done from the ground. And then the contractor came back and proceeded to crawl across the top of those foundation systems and set those pieces in front of themselves. Slows the process down, makes it more expensive because time is money in the contractor's world, right? And then the third type is what we say is full top-down construction. Of course, if you have the most extreme permitting restrictions where you're not allowed to even touch the ground, sometimes you can't move any dirt. And we have that going on right now in Atlanta, Georgia. Everything has to be installed from the top. The foundations and all of the components, everything is being delivered from the top, and you're not touching, theoretically, not even touching the ground. You're just installing from the top. Slow process. To give you an idea, our project in Atlanta, Georgia, they're building 1, 2, or 3 spans a day. If you were able to go with a traditional boardwalk installation, you might be able to build 10 spans in a day. So it's a 2, 3x multiplier on the time that's involved in how you build a boardwalk. So very important to consider it. Do have those discussions with your design team if you're considering a boardwalk. Super important. And then the material selection. So now you've gone through all of these evaluations and you're saying, okay, time to make a decision. What material do I choose? And you've certainly heard from us about the precast option. There's advantages, there's disadvantages, there's timber, and there's composites. Those are primarily the three that you think of. Most people think of timber first. And you're going to be considering design criteria. Can it support those loads that John talked about with the AASHTO bridge code? Does the structural engineer think you can make it work with wood or plastic? What about the aesthetics? Typically, timber is looked at as very high on the aesthetics. People like the look of a timber boardwalk. Durability is important also, depending on where you are. Can it be subjected to the environment? Slip resistance is extremely important here in Mecklenburg County. I know that slip resistance is very important, and that is driving their decision in moving from a timber walking surface to a concrete walking surface based on slip resistance. ADA compliance is, of course, important too. That might come into play in how you fund the project. Your funding source may say absolutely needs to be compliant with the ADA guidelines. So now you're thinking about, can these pieces remain ADA compliant over the life of the structure? And then there's, of course, environmental reasons to choose one material over the other. And definitely timber composite and precast all have their advantages in how you choose those. So slip resistance, what does that mean? There's a fancy machine that you can use and you can test the slip resistance of the boardwalks. And John, let's go to the next slide. That's been done locally. The local consultant did this. They tested timber, composite, and precast. And here's what they came up with. And there's no surprises here. You look at the dynamic coefficient of friction. Tells you how good it is for slippage. If you're above 0.42, the protocol in ANSI would tell you you're good. And all of the materials that were tested were all good. The problem is when it gets wet. When you put water on a concrete surface or a timber surface or a composite surface, the results are very different. Those 8 bars on the left show you that concrete, when it's wet, is just as effective as when it is dry. Of course, a little bit worse, but not as bad. Now, when you start going to timber or composite, slip resistance becomes a problem. And I'm a cyclist. I can attest to that. I've ridden on timber boardwalks when it's wet, and I've run on timber boardwalks when it's wet. And you can slip on those corners. There's no doubt about it. I've seen it happen, and I've heard it from owners calling with problems with that slip resistance. So sort of intuitive, right? So ADA compliance. What do we mean about ADA compliance? Well, generally, there's a couple of things that you have to comply to. One is the separation horizontally of the gaps in the planks and the vertical separation of the pieces. A trip hazard. Are you creating a trip hazard for walkers and users on the boardwalk system? And you can imagine, of course, all of these materials work. Some perform better than others. On day one, they certainly can all meet that requirement. Deterioration in those components, one is going to outperform the other. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And durability. And I'll quickly say that this is very intuitive to you, I'm sure. Timber, composite, and precast concrete have very different lifespans. And I can tell you from experience in doing this for over 16 years, a timber boardwalk within the Carolinas, I've been told from owners like you that my timber boardwalk can last anywhere from as little as 5 years, possibly up to 25 years. That's the range. That's what you told us, 5 to 25 years. Composite boardwalks, I don't see that a lot on boardwalks. I do see that a lot on residential platforms. But certainly the longevity of a composite boardwalk would stretch a little bit further than a timber boardwalk. My experience with precast concrete is over 30 years, and I can tell you that the Army Corps of Engineers declares a precast concrete product as suitable, durable for 50 to 75-year design life. And that's not something we made up. That's something for precast concrete products. So you get what you pay for from top to bottom on the different materials. Just something to think about. Aesthetics, timber typically wins out on aesthetics. Timber is what people think of. Timber, they like the timber product. It's softer. It feels more part of the environment. It's typically the traditional choice. That's what the go-to material choice is. And I can't disagree that they're beautiful looking when they're first installed. Composite has come on the market, and there's several different composite boardwalks. You can think about Trex. Trex is one product that has beautiful decking panels. I see it a lot on decking, say on residential applications. It doesn't quite have the strength of concrete, but it's a very good product if all you need to do is wrap around a pool or wrap around your home for some reasons. But on occasion, it has been used on boardwalks, but it does need some proper support underneath to be able to take the loads. And precast concrete with our system, I'm here to tell you that precast concrete, from an aesthetic standpoint, is probably one of our disadvantages. People think it's cold and harsh, but our particular product, Permatrack, does have a texture on the top, and we've listened to the design community, and they've said, "Hey, we want timber as a texture." Some people love that, some people hate that, think it looks fake. Another option that we do is a sandblast texture, and that's to give it a lot more slip resistance. And those are the two most common textures that we've done. And then we also have color. Color is an integral color, and we've done some tans, and we've done some browns, and we've even done green and red and clay just to kind of suit the environment. So precast concrete does have the flexibility of modifying from the aesthetic standpoint. Environmental reasons, of course, you understand that the timber typically has the chemical treated to the not only to the decking pieces, but the piles and the railings. There is that potential environmental disadvantage. The composites, as you know, typically would be a inert material, and they're not chemically treated. So that's one advantage that they have there, but it is not a renewable product, which is a disadvantage to them. Precast concrete gets a bad rap for the manufacturing process, but over the life of the structure and the recyclable nature of the product, it gains a lot of traction when you start looking at an LCA or a life cycle analysis, which has been done comparing the three products. Be happy to share those results with you if you'd like to hear more about the environmental LCA analysis on the products. So we're almost there, guys. I've got 10 slides, 10 pictures to show you. I've randomly picked up some North Carolina projects. I hope some of these are in your counties. I did check the registration list. Julie was able to give me the names on the list, and I wanted to get you projects in your county. Give us an attaboy on the chat if these are your projects or you've been to those. We'd love to hear that. Even better, I would love to have a picture of you standing on the boardwalk, and we'll put those on our website and feature in social. If you're an outgoing type, if not, no problem. We won't do anything with it. So let's start with Jackson County. This is our very, very first project we got 16 years ago. I was extremely proud of this project. I've got a copy of the check on my wall because I was so proud of this project. We lost money. We lost $5,000 on this job, but we badly wanted to do this project. This was in Cullowhee, North Carolina. Think about this as not so much a boardwalk, but it was an observation platform for the petroglyph that was extremely important to Jackson County. And they wanted to create this platform, and you see these observation bump outs or cantilevered platforms on the right and in the middle, on the left, right? So these are great ways to bring people without disturbing the ground and enjoy the petroglyph and really learn about the historical significance of this rock to the area. Very proud of that project. And now here locally, Mecklenburg County has been very good to Permatrack. There's a movement, and I like to say because of Permatrack from 15 years ago, the movement is we don't want to continue with timber decking, slippery, not long-term, doesn't have the durability. The movement is to go to a concrete wearing surface. Precast is one option, and poured in place would be another option. Our precast option is what you see here. They've chosen to go with a lower cost railing, which is good because it lowers the cost, but also it softens the look of the concrete, right? If you're not a fan of concrete material, you get the slip resistance, you get the durability, and then you get a softer looking railing system on here. This is a very typical Mecklenburg County. If you go on all the trails here locally, you're most likely going to see a railing system like this, and you'll see a surface like you see there with the Permatrack system. This next one is with the Town of Cary. The Town of Cary has been absolutely fantastic and immediately was a very early adopter of our system. This structure that you're looking at there is 15 years old. The company was founded 16 years ago, so right away we got this order. The Town of Cary was adamant about not putting in something that wasn't going to last. They purely buy into a long-term product. And the Permatrack precast concrete boardwalk system is a standard for the town of Cary. And several other towns have followed suit with that. So if you're interested in knowing how to write a standard around a precast boardwalk, happy to share with you what the town of Cary's done. And since then, they probably have now, we're building one more this year. There's about 20 Permatrack structures in the town of Cary limits. So we're very happy, very pleased with the partnership with the town of Cary. They do a wonderful job. And moving right along, excuse me, moving right along here to the Cross Charlotte Trail. I know many of you have heard about that. Joe Fry is leading this effort, and fantastic use of the precast product here. Think about a boardwalk going through a culvert that has 4 cells of water flowing through this platform or through the tunnel. And you can tell by looking at the railing, you see stream debris gathering on the railing post. So you know there's a lot of water, a lot of flooding, and a lot of debris going through here. How do you think that would perform if they put a timber or a composite in this setting that runs through the tunnel? So they used the Permatrack system because they needed the durability. And I've heard from Jay Higginbotham and Bert Lynn, and they told me this thing went completely underwater, more than about 10 feet underwater. The box culverts are flowing full, and the stream debris came down. And this was during some of the hurricane storm events, and it actually knocked down the railing that you see on there because there was such a violent velocity and stream debris, and it knocked down the railing system. Mecklenburg County had to come in and rebuild the railing system, but they were there to declare that the Permatrack did fantastic. They got what they paid for. It lasted through those storm events. And then Mecklenburg County also did a Paw Creek Greenway, which is in the Mecklenburg County Parks and Recreation cycle also. Not quite as dramatic as the Cross Charlotte Trail one, but you can see here, very simple. You see the railing, the timber railing standard that they chose for Paw Creek also. And then a few more pictures for you. Holly Springs, I don't know if there's anybody on from the town of Holly Springs, but certainly Stewart, the designer, chose to use a precast concrete boardwalk system there, similar to the town of Cary, right? Similar to Mecklenburg County timber railing system with a precast concrete boardwalk. You kind of get the best of both. And the beautiful thing about these railing systems, and you can stay there, John. The beautiful thing about using the railing system is the railings are top mounted. They sit on top of the panels. So there's no need to remove the panels if there's any damage or replacement system. This next project is a high profile project for us for the city of Hickory. And I think there might be some Hickory, maybe 1 or 2 people from Hickory on here. This is the Hickory Riverfront or Riverwalk project. These 2 users and their dogs were there. They were willing to let me take their picture. Behind them is Lake Hickory, and then 321 crosses over just around the corner to the left. Fantastic use of the product. You'll see that the City of Hickory used a different railing system. They used a modular black picket railing system. Again, look at how the railing is attached. It's attached to the top of the precast product. Take a look at the texture. The texture is also this grittier texture, better for slip resistance on this one. So very good use of the precast product here also. And thank you, Brian. Brian giving us a thumbs up on that project. He uses that one every day. Love it. Brian, I want to see a picture of you on it. Okay, and then this is one of my favorites. I'm a runner. I'm a triathlete. I get on the trails all the time. I love to run. And I came across this one day on my popular Saturday running route. A big tree, stream debris came down from the left, landed on the boardwalk, on the Permatrack boardwalk, and didn't do any damage. No damage. Didn't even damage those little curbs that you see on the edge. The maintenance folks, Mike Monroe and his folks, they came by, they saw cut the tree, they pushed it off to the side, and users could continue on the boardwalk system. But this is a great example of how crossing McAlpine Creek, or any creek for that matter, you have a trail running up to a truss bridge spanning with a larger product, a truss bridge, for example, and then a boardwalk on the far side of the picture. But again, durability really spoke and really, really paid dividends for Mecklenburg County. This structure is 15 years old now. Okay, we're almost done. Flat Branch Nature Preserve. This is one in Charlotte, North Carolina. I include this one to show you the other end of the spectrum. Sometimes the pieces are small. Sometimes the footings are precast like you see there. Look at the little conical shaped pieces under the gentleman's foot off to the right. Everything was set on the top. And you'll say, well, why is that? Why didn't they just do a foundation system? They did a precast footing system because it was in a wetland and they didn't want to, we were required not to disturb the root system of the trees in this nature preserve. So everything had to be sitting on the ground. And then maybe you're going to say, well, doesn't it move with the ground through the seasonal changes? Yes, it does. It was one or the other. It was either going to move or you're going to have to disturb the trees. And the trees controlled on this particular project. The pieces, because they are modular and fairly small, they can move, they can twist, they can move with the ground. And that's exactly what this modular system is doing. Okay, and I think this is my last slide, guys, before we open it up for some questions, if you have some of those. And Julie, let me know if there's any in the chat for questions. John and I will answer those. The Town of Cary, again, this is another picture of the Town of Cary's standard. This is what they do. Now, you can see, look at the product itself. This is the Permatrack panels, but the pigment is a tan colored. They specifically wanted a tan color. They specifically wanted that sandblast texture. It looks like bubbles on there, right? So it's a little bit rougher surface. And then they chose to go with a timber railing system because look on the left and look on the right. This is going right in the backyard of some residents right there coming on the White Oak Greenway. So very residential setting. They wanted to soften the look between these homes and please not only the homeowners, but they wanted a good, long-lasting boardwalk system for the users of this particular trail system. Wow, we went through a lot of slides. We're here for questions. I'll stop talking. Julie, I'll turn it over to you if there's any questions. I'm not looking at the chat, so maybe
Yeah.
you just read the questions to us if
Well,
there's any.
thank you so much. I loved seeing all of those pictures of the beautiful boardwalks and designs that have been put together. Fantastic presentation. I am glad you have your contact information because that was one of the questions in the chat, and
Okay,
I put your emails in there, so
excellent.
I have those. And as soon as I hit enter, I was like, oh, I probably should have checked with them first, but
Yeah.
figured you probably would be okay with it. I'm glad to see that on your last slide here. Anybody have questions for John or Jason?
Yeah, it's always
I,
hard for us to know what
yeah.
what the audience wants to hear. So
Well, I had a question. You had shown a graphic about the slip resistance, and it had columns, and I didn't quite understand the difference between what the gray and the blue were showing.
yeah,
But that's really interesting and fascinating to see that slip resistance and the differences there.
yeah, good question, Julie. And I didn't do a great job. I was going fast for you, but the gray was at the dry condition, and the blue was the wet condition. And
Okay.
the testing procedure is you have to test in both conditions with that little robot-looking machine that we showed you,
Yeah.
and then you record both. So in the dry condition, everything passed in the dry. When it was wet is when the timber and the composite had challenges. They fell below the protocol of 0.42. So it's just science sort of telling you what you know. You've seen those signs, slippery when wet.
Mhm.
And yeah, I see a lot of those especially on the timber. I see a lot in the composite. It's just science telling you that, yes, that's correct. That sign should go up.
Great. Anyone else have questions? All right. Well, I'm so impressed with the work that you all are doing, and I am grateful for your time and contributing to our knowledge. And now we know who to call.
Of course.
Fantastic information. Thank you so much.
You're
Thanks
welcome. And
everyone who dialed in. As a reminder, we have registration on for our upcoming next one is on the SCORP plan. And um, this recording will be added to our YouTube channel as all of our sessions are recorded and put there, and they're on that same registration page on our website. So appreciate you all and the work that you're doing to help make North Carolina the great trail state.
absolutely. Let's build more trails. We're all
Build
for it.
more trails.
Yes. All right. Thank you guys. I appreciate it. Take care.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
everybody. Bye.
All right. Bye.
Bye.